Hi, Matthew. Welcome back. We are in our Facebook group, Understanding Worldviews. We are trying to get to know more about your book, The Face Off. And we did go through a couple of weeks of sessions, like a 10-15 minute. It's already recorded in our Facebook group. People who are here can always go back and watch that. And I am Kumar. I'm kind of trying to host this one, partnering with Matthew to bring his message to the world. And as you all know, that Matthew has written a few books, and we're trying to get to know more about the books and try to get people to understand where he's coming from, his background, and all the information that he has. And today, Shellen happens to join us also, Matthew's wife, Shellen. And welcome both of you. And Shellen, you want to take it over from here? Go ahead.
I know this is an opportunity that God has given him for this long to do some research on this. And so especially understanding this worldviews is such an important fact, I believe, for this time. So I just want him to continue that discussion and continue that, talk. Yeah.
Yes, Matthew.
Thank you, Kumar. Thank you, Shellen. We last time covered the story of Venice, at least part of it. So when you try to go back and think through it, what we are trying to understand is that what is the meaning in the title Face Off? So I did basically say that in 732 AD, in the Battle of Tours, certain things happened before that. This amazing growth of the kingdom that Prophet Muhammad established, the Islamic movement. It came through Spain into France, and in the Battle of Tours, really they suffered their first major defeat. From then onwards, till 1453, they kept on trying to conquer Europe. And in 1453, the city of Constantinople, they conquered. In this period of time, the single most important city-state that Europe had was Venice. So last session, we covered the story of Venice in a significant manner. But I think I want to pick up from there again. So let's look at the time, the scale. So if we look at the PowerPoint.
I can share the screen for you.
Please do share the screen. Last time I was telling, Renaissance really, most scholars would say it started around 1300 AD. It was mostly focused in and around the city-states of Italy. So the true story, it's not just Venice, it's not just Naples, it's not just Florence. And Renaissance is certainly, a lot of credit has got to be given to the story of Florence. And there were a few other very important city-states. Every one of them had a model of government, fairly good in trade. And that is the part of the story that I'm telling. This series is not about Renaissance, but it is more about how we got to have this worldview in the West. So that's why I said I've used a methodology of dividing into 4 equal quarters. That is, the first quarter starting from 1425 AD to 1565. That's 140 years. I call that the first quarter that gave birth to the Protestant Revolution. And it started changing slowly the underlying worldview. We'll come to that in detail today. The second quarter from 1566 to 1706, another 140 years. And that's when the idea, a king need not rule over us. The law is the king. So even the king and the citizen, the rulers and the ruled, will obey the law. This is a major worldview change that still has not occurred in many parts of the world, but it started in Europe. How did it start? So post that, that is in the third quarter, 1707 to 1847, in Britain, or at that time, England and Wales combined with Scotland in the Act of Union, that is 1707. And that's how England gets to be known as Great Britain. England, Scotland, Wales, three nations joined together and created the first nation state. 70 years later, approximately 1776, in the United States, 13 colonies join together and say, we also want to create a state. And that is the first nation state from my perspective, that we're talking about the United States. By 1948, that becomes normalized all across the world. The city-states have been replaced and nation-states is everywhere. So this is possible only because there is an underlying worldview change, and that we are going to explore in detail. So fourth quarter, 1848 to 1988, is very recent. And this we will talk in the context of what the Bible has got to say. So today we're going to focus just on the first quarter. Let's go to the next slide. In the first quarter, as I said earlier, 1425 to 1565, what happens is that the worldview that is underlying starts changing in Europe. The basic ingredients, the building blocks of changing the perspective from city-states to nation-states. If you look at that 140 years, you suddenly recognize we still would take one more quarter to get to certain changes in our worldview. And I'm talking about at the end of second quarter, suddenly Britain recognizes that they are behind France, Spain. When you really look at it, the French kingdom and the Spanish kingdom, they really had empires. But then Britain discovers what I call a modern paradigm of power. And that's how the nation-state concept becomes normalized in the fourth quarter. I'll wait for that story in another session. In this session, what I want to cover is how did this change of worldview occur? And how did it happen in Venice? So, as the slide tells you, printing began. And look at the story of what did they print? And most of the printing houses, last time I talked about how Venice had developed a navy. They were very good across the Mediterranean. They were good going outside as well. It's not just the Adriatic, all over the Mediterranean. They used to take pilgrims regularly to Jerusalem and bring them back. They were well established as a maritime power. And by 1300, many city-states in Italy wanted to compete, and they even tried to overtake Venice. So by the time printing, the Germans, you know the story of Gutenberg and moving type and how they came about. And Germans had a colony in Venice. Okay, printing is first introduced in Venice in 1469. And exactly 19 years later, there are 200 competing press businesses. There were 200 presses in Venice. The key question that I want to think about, what did they read? What did they study? What was the printing press used for? And before I answer that question, there was a brilliant guy by the name Aldus Manutius. He was a classical scholar just outside of Rome. He thinks about setting up a printing business, and he recognizes Venice has got the most freedom of expression, freedom of speech. He doesn't have to fear anything. He doesn't have to be afraid of the power of the papal state or the church or his enemies. So he comes to Venice, and there, in the great humanist tradition, he starts a printing press. And it is for 3 generations that they kept it, and they were very influential. At the same time, remember, the bankers of Europe, they were from Florence. And you all know the story of the Medici, father, son, and the grandson. By the time Lorenzo comes to power, all across Europe, the Medici Bank is well respected. Obviously, the city-state of Milan and Genoa. And Genoa, the Genoese wanted to compete with Venice with a navy, and they came to attack Venice. So there's a lot of stories, and I don't want to focus on just those stories. And these are all Renaissance stories. Naples, Rome, the papal state, all of them played some role or the other. The key observation before we go forward I want to make is that Italy made a great contribution to good standards. And it was possible because they developed the double entry accounting system. And somebody like Kumar, who is a CPA, who can easily tell you that story. Without the basic building block of a commercial society, which is the double entry accounting system, the books can be examined. You know where the money has been invested or wasted, or where is the cash flow coming, where it is going. All this was possible because of this amazing discovery called the double entry system. And remember, that's just one building block. The next one, I talked about it. Luther was a monk. He was very convinced that he wanted to know and experience God. He had an amazing mentor, Staupitz, Johann Staupitz. And Staupitz used to listen to Luther's confession. And one time, basically, he told Luther, please have some serious sin before you confess next time. And he loved him so much, he sent him to Rome. And when Luther was in Rome, he recognized the church was not serious. There were priests who were married, who had lots of bad things about them. And Luther could not accept that this was the state of the church in Rome. So he comes back, and eventually Staupitz enables him to go to Wittenberg, and 1517, October 31st, he put debating, the 95 Theses, he nailed it to the church there, and all across Europe, debate started. Now, remember, the first quarter, the first 100 years is coming to an end. And Luther's ideas are being debated all across. And in Geneva, the French-speaking town in Switzerland, Calvin is an exile, and he's teaching precisely what Luther was teaching. So while Luther was doing this, about 8 years later, 1525, suddenly the European Empire is being threatened by Turks. The Turkish army, it's not a small invasion, they came up to Vienna in 1929. from September 27 to October 15, no one thought Vienna could escape. And because the entire government was focused on this Turkish invasion, there was a saying in Europe: Luther's lucky star was the Turkish army or the Turkish soldier, because the Turkish invasion made sure the European authorities did not focus on Luther. By the time Luther
that was 1500, right? 1517 to 1529. I remember I heard
1529 is when
1929 by mistake. Yeah, I don't know whether you mentioned that.
Yes, 1529. Yeah, that's
1529. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Did I say 1929? I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's 1529.
Yeah. Okay.
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 So
I had a quick question.
yes, please.
Did Calvin and Luther connect, or did they know each other, or
They
were
did.
doing it
They
separate?
did. They did. But they were all in separate areas. If you look at the next slide, we are going to come to the story of Huguenots and Anabaptists and how this affected the worldview. That is what we are going to discuss today. So, Kumar, if you go to the next. So, about 50 years before Luther and Calvin, there were a group of people. There was a monk by the name Michael Sattler. I think he was 37 or under 37 when he was killed by the church. He was also a Catholic monk. He studied the Bible and he came to the conclusion that what the church is telling is not what the Bible is telling. So Menno Simons and Michael Sattler basically are called the fathers, the founding fathers of the Anabaptist movement. So this was prior to Luther, but they did not become as famous or spectacular as Luther, and there is a reason for that. Luther was a very good propaganda person. Today's, what we would say is that public relations, printing. Once he stood up and challenged the Pope and the Italian leadership of the church, the Germans recognized what Luther is saying has got an element of nationalism as well. So in Wittenberg, they were not interested in surrendering Luther to the Italians. So there's a lot more of stories and undercurrents. At the same time, there was another reformer in Switzerland, in Zurich, Ulrich Zwingli, and he was also a firebrand. He used armies and he said, I will fight for the sake of the kingdom. Now, I want us to take a backseat here. You remember what Jesus said, those who take the sword will die by the sword. So poor Zwingli, he got killed. Anyway, the point is that Jesus did not talk about a kingdom on this planet Earth. It's a kingdom of the Spirit, and it will become visible on this planet Earth as a physical kingdom in the fullness of time. So today, if you study the Bible talks about a spiritual kingdom in the spirits of men. And it's a very important thing that I want to focus on. We know John Calvin and Luther, but there was a brilliant professor who was considered not good looking, lean, short. His name was Philip Melanchthon. He is the one who gave the systematic theology which refuted the Catholic Church's theology. So Philip Melanchthon was a fellow professor with Luther on the campus in Wittenberg. Now, while Calvin was in Geneva, John Knox was another person who carried a sword and was a physical bodyguard of Calvin. So John Knox was captured. He was a galley slave. And eventually, when he gets off the galley, he goes to Scotland, and George Wishart was a mentor for John Knox in Scotland. So in many ways, Kumar, the way I would say is that in multiple places across Europe, the fire was being lit. Reformation was happening in multiple pockets. There was no way we could call it a centralized movement. It was a multifaceted movement which was possible because of printing. And what did they print? The Bible. And what did they study? The Bible. And what did they argue about? The Bible. And suddenly there were 100 expressions of Christian faith which was different from what the Catholic Church was teaching. So that's why I would say Lutherans in Germany produced many movements. Now, Anglicans in England, I want to say a word about it. Most of us know the story of Annie Boleyn and Henry VIII and his love affair and all that. Forget about all that. There were many godly people in that movement who were trying to study the Bible. And one such group, I talked about John Knox and George Wishart, they were in Scotland. The Presbyterians came out of that. The Reformed churches came out of Calvin, Quakers. And I want to talk a little bit about the Huguenots. Huguenots are French people who really took up the study of the Bible, and they were persecuted severely. We're talking about hundreds of people were massacred. There's lots of stories, and Huguenots, I think 400,000 people fled from France over a 50-year period into Prussia, into England, and many of them came to the US. So remember, in the last session, I talked about Venice had ambassadors all across Europe. They had a network. And along this network, it was very funny, the Catholic Church and the Protestants would exchange messages. So persecution became a very serious state. In modern terms, we would say hunting terrorists. That's how they behaved. So there's a lot of suffering and a lot of people martyred and burned at stake. All this, and there's a very famous book called Fox's Book of Martyrs. These are all things, they were part of the worldview change that was coming. So if you look at the next slide, you would recognize, that's what I was trying to say. France lost more than 400,000 of its Protestant inhabitants. Many of them migrated to England, Prussia, Netherlands, the US, and they became very useful citizens of their adopted countries. Now, lots of people, economic scholars say that because when they migrated, they took a lot of technology and knowledge with them, and that's why France was behind Germany and certainly way behind England in the first industrial revolution, because a lot of the skilled people left. In today's parlance or terms, we would say, if you go to San Francisco, there's a lot of technology skills there, internet. But earlier, the technology corridor was on the East Coast, around MIT. How did it all go to the West Coast? So there are actual stories when these things happen. So I'm telling these stories to tell you, in the first quarter, couple of things that we should remember. Leading a city-state, perhaps the most powerful city-state, was a man by the name Doge. It was an elected office. We spell it in English, D-O-G-E, which is as good as the CEO of today's or the president of a republic. They had this office for almost 800 years. And it was so well regulated. There's much for us to learn from them. Typically, I didn't cover it in the last session, so I wanted to do this to make sure that we understand. Many of these things that we consider the contributions of the West. Some of them have got great precedence. Venice is a great example of a CEO who was very, very responsible to his shareholders. There were 10 members. I mean, there is a joke that the Doge was literally the prisoner of the state. He had to keep all the rules. His wife could not have any shares in any establishment outside of Venice. His children could not marry from foreign states. There were so much regulation to make sure the Doge will not make a decision that would adversely affect Venice and benefiting him. And that is precisely what the American government, the president, you have to declare and be uninvolved with your personal business. So there are so many things that we can really learn from these things. What I want to point out today is this: the spread of the concept that all men are created equal. It happened through the Protestant Revolution. And slowly, when people started studying the Bible, they said, even the kings have to obey the law. And post that came the revolution that we call of modern science. And that I'm not dealing with today, but I'm just telling you the underlying elements of it. Economics, the invisible hand. And over time, city-states were replaced by nation-states. And once the nation-states functioned for almost 200 years, that's when something far more important happened. And that's what I want to point out. In 1948, God brought Israel back into existence. And that is in the fourth quarter. So what I'm trying to tell is this. This whole story has got the grand weaver behind it, the great artist. And God is at work. That's what I really want us to study together. Kumar, I think that's where I would like to stop today.
I like the way you explained about the kingdom concept. Yeah. Can you go back and refresh us on the kingdom concept there?
Yes, sure, certainly. For example,
is that what we lost during all this transition also?
Yes. That's why, that's what one of the very key observations. Thank you, Kumar, for asking that. If you go back into the Old Testament, when the judges were ruling, the last judge, the prophet Samuel, and people come to him and say, we want a king. And God says, I'm so sorry that they don't understand what I am trying to do through their life. Okay, I'll give them a king, but they won't like it. And King Saul, in no time, leads the nation astray. Then King David comes. Thankfully, King David was far more godly. Even then, his kids, in 300 years, lost their kingdom. And Solomon's temple is burnt down because man was not ready for self-government. So that's very interesting. The concept of the kingdom was all across the world. And think about it. If the British had not come to India, Indians get upset when I say this, India would have been 400 to 600 kingdoms. They would all be fighting. There would be no structural infrastructure. No. The story of Europe. Why is Europe far more advanced than India? Indians found the zero, Arabic numerals, lots of things. Indians were very good in algebra, but we did not give birth to modern science. So that's why I'm saying the underlying worldview matters, and losing the kingdom was such an important development that the Greeks missed, the Indians missed, and it happened through Scottish history. But today, I don't think that would be taught in American school system. So that's why it's very important. Very, very important.
So also what you're saying is like with the help of printing, there is something revolutionized the people, because they all got this knowledge or the foundation from somewhere that's common. Is that what helped the, even though there was no kingdom, there is something like a common thread that was going in underneath, like a worldview, as you're saying. Is that the
Okay.
printing? Yeah.
You are asking a detailed question. For example, the Lutheran worldview was very similar to the Anglican worldview. It was very similar to the Pietist worldview. But when you think about it, all these worldviews were born out of the study of the scriptures. So each one, whether it was the church government or even about the life of Jesus, ultimately they recognized truth has got great importance. And once truth became important, science became important, exactness became important. Suddenly, the worldview started changing. And the best part of the worldview change after the kingdom was when Adam Smith said, if we all work together in economics with the selfish motive of trying to improve my lot, eventually there is something called the invisible hand. And that is precisely a picture of God. So it's very interesting that worldview, we have to really understand it. And I'm glad Kumar and Sheldon, both of you brought it out. We can explore it in detail on a time scale in the second and the third quarter.
Yeah. I'm excited. Yeah, to learn more about this book, and and I know we have a few audience today who have been watching online also on Facebook. They can go back on the previous previous recordings which we have live. They can catch up with all our the discussions we had, and hopefully we will have. They can request for the books if they want, and I think you can sell them the book. Yeah, so. I don't know how much you're selling that book for right now. So it's.
I will leave all that to you, Kumar. Put together a plan. That way we can do as a study circle, however we do it.
Yeah, if anybody wants to buy the books, they can always send us a request on the group, and we can ship that to them and stuff like that for now. But we have great plans. We want to really educate a lot of people. Understanding worldviews is where we are starting to in our whole ministry journey, and I look forward to working with you in the long run. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You guys have a good evening.